Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission du format Super Friends. C'est dans cette émission que l'on va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail. Et on aura aujourd'hui le plaisir de recevoir une nouvelle fois dans ce podcast James Tynion IV, qui était déjà passé dans notre podcast en 2023. Depuis, l'auteur phare de la scène indépendante américaine a créé de nouvelles séries comme Worldtr33, The Nice House by the Sea, qui sort en ce moment chez Urban Comics. Et c'est d'ailleurs dans ce cadre-là qu'on fait cette interview, puisque James est revenu nous voir en France. Donc évidemment, on ne pouvait pas le louper et on a pris nos micros pour aller lui poser quelques questions pour parler surtout d'horreur et bien sûr de The Nice House on the Lake et de sa suite de The Nice House by the Sea. Le générique se lance et l'interview sera en anglais. Merci à toutes et tous de nous écouter. N'hésitez pas à partager ce podcast si notre travail vous plaît. So that was my short introduction in French. I think you didn't understand anything.
Oh, no, not at all. I caught a few words in there.
Yeah, like nice house or something like that.
Those ones were pretty easy to call out.
All right. So it's been 2 years since the last time we spoke together. So that's one of the good things with these interviews, that we don't have to go through the basics, like were you a comic book reader when you were young? So we already know everything there is to know about that. But even though we spoke a little bit about horror the last time, I really want to go deeper into the horror field, because it's one of your most used genre in terms of your bibliography. And you told me the last time that you were not a fan of horror stories when you were younger and that you were easily scared. So why would you go still in the horror genre afterwards?
I mean, I think that there were elements of horror that I did gravitate towards, but it was the trappings of horror. Like I loved Nightmare Before Christmas and like Tim Burton things. But like true horror, like the actual, like, you know, an actual scary story, I just thought was going to be way too scary for me. But it was really in college that I started recognizing that like what I was afraid of was actually scarier than what any of the movies actually were. That I was avoiding watching. So it was a slow reintroduction where it was like, okay, so it's like my brain is cooking up these very scary things. But
can you name us? Can you tell us a bit about the things that you were scared of?
I mean, like a lot of it is stuff that's, you know, made it into the comics. Like I used to have a lot of nightmares. And when I was growing up, they're like, you know, it sounds silly, but
it doesn't.
E.T. the Extraterrestrial scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, you know, like the scene when you just see his finger through the through the stairs.
Oh yeah,
you know.
No, for me, the scariest scene. It's the first time Elliot bumps into E.T. in the cornfield, and E.T. screams in a way that is like the sound mixing of that is so fascinating. It is like one of the least human noises that I think has ever been put on film. And you know, Spielberg, he's hugely influenced by horror, and he puts a lot of that in there. So even in a family friendly movie, so it's just like E.T. was a figure that would show up in recurring nightmares for me my entire childhood. And some of that actually got repurposed into a comic of mine, The Closet. That the idea of this, you know, strange little gremlin figure that would just emerge from the closet and then had like really, you know, that would basically like pin me down, and I would have to, and like rob my ability to speak and all of that stuff. So it's like I would have so many nightmares about that. But then beyond that, I would just have nightmares of just my friends dying in like terrifying situations, and, you know, and then the standard nightmares as well. But it was I was a very scared kid. But I really enjoyed at sleepovers with my friends once I started, you know, like in late middle school and early high school. I started basically telling stories of my nightmares to my friends. And actually the opening sequence in the first issue of Something is Killing the Children, is very much based on those sorts of me telling like, like the stories of my nightmares. And then I would realize that it's like, okay, if I tweak some of the things that actually happened in the nightmare, I can make the story scarier for my friends. And I really enjoyed doing that. But I would still be too scared I would enjoy scaring my friends, but I was too scared to watch the scary movies. And through all of this, I started dabbling in reading horror. So, and it was always like, I always had excuses. Like, when I started reading something like The Sandman, I pretended that Sandman wasn't horror. It was like a fantasy story, even though it's like right at the beginning, it's pure horror. Especially like A Doll's House is just a pure horror story. And then I read a lot of Neil Gaiman's fiction, and then I started making the jump over to, okay, I'm going to read some Stephen King. And it's like, it's not as like, because I'm not watching a scary thing and I can put the book down, like I allowed myself, that was sort of different. But it was like, over time, I started realizing that all of the stories that I was most gravitating towards were horror stories. And then when I started writing, the stories that I kept wanting to write the most were horror stories. So the genre kind of slowly dragged me in. And then in college, I was a film studies minor. And so not about the creation of movies, but actually like studying them and writing analytical essays about them. And basically for 2 years, I did all of my independent studies on horror movies. And so there for one, like over, like I think my junior and senior year, I watched like about 500 horror movies. And by the end of that process, I was totally desensitized. I was no longer afraid of watching horror movies. And I was watching the like very intense, like, that was, this would have been the, late 2000s. So this was like the era of the new French extremity and all of that. So it's like Martyrs and things like that. So it's like, I went from not watching any of it to Martyrs, which is about as far a leap as you can make. So like you saw
High Tension and stuff like that. All right.
Yeah.
Good. That was the good times. It's also when I discovered horror as a genre, and then I just dig into it, and I saw in the theater.
Yeah.
And Mortier also.
Yeah.
And that was great.
Yeah.
Traumatizing, but great nonetheless.
Like a genuinely nihilist film in some ways. Like it is deeply, deeply upsetting.
Yeah. But so, and would you say that watching all these movies maybe like made you choose also between the horror style that you would get into your stories? Because there's like horror is not a genre per se, like there's a multiple kinds of horrors, and you seem not to go for all those kinds. You pick them. So how do you choose which kind of horror you want to put in your story?
I think it more comes from it comes the other way around. Like I sort of understand that my instincts are always going to be to like go toward the horror genre. Like that is, it's the, like almost any story kind of becomes a horror story because I am talking about what scares me most and what makes me, whether it's the thing that I find the most frightening in myself or the most upsetting about society. It's like I want to dig into the uncomfortable feelings. Like I think as a writer, that's how I find story. It's like I'm trying to dig into an uncomfortable set of feelings. And I find it very exciting to kind of touch the live wire and tell very personal stories that way. But it is like, I look at what I'm trying to say in the story, and I kind of pull together all of the vibes that I am trying to express in the story. And it like, Worldtr33 is a really interesting one because Fernando and I had started just sending emails back and forth in the early days of the pandemic, like in COVID lockdown, where both of us were reading a lot, and we were reading a lot of, and we were just sharing our reading lists. And
you two knew each other from previous?
Yeah, we had worked. we'd worked briefly together on some Batman stuff, and then on a few issues of Justice League Dark. And we'd always been friendly. I had always really loved his work, and he was someone that I was like, we should work on something together someday. And then it was realizing that we were both interested in not just the mainstream of comics, but like we were bonding over Anio Asano's Goodbye Poon Poon, and like Alan Moore's From Hell, and but even like I was going through the entire Adrian Tomina library at the time and all of that. It was like during that era, I was reading a lot. And so we were just talking about what different types of comic storytelling and what we kind of found interesting. And I had this like, these raw ideas that I knew were kind of building towards a story. And like during that era, because I was looking at the science fiction genre, and I was like, what would be my version of essentially a cyberpunk story, built in the same aesthetic conversation and thematic conversations that go back to 1980s cyberpunk stories like, Akira and Ghost in the Shell and Neuromancer and like all of that, but then that then kind of were recrystallized in 1999 with The Matrix. But it's like, what is the next leap of that genre without it being a nostalgic leap? And it's one of those things where we were talking about like the things that were scaring us the most about the world, and the kind of like radicalism that was building in the dark corners of the internet and all of that. And it's like, and I had this rough idea for a couple of years at that point of just, a group of friends who discovered like an evil internet beneath the internet. And I started like going back and forth with him about like, what would that story look like and what would it be? And how could we tell like, a horror story that was like very different and would be a big story? It would be the equivalent of, like you can see the trappings of Stephen King's It in that story. And it was just like, it was throwing together all of these kinds of influences, but it was also understanding, especially when we created the character Fear, Sammy Winter in the story, that like, that character is almost an anime character. Like she is like larger than life. She is like, like this like personification of like, that is like hyper stylized, like sexualization, but also she's the least sexual character in the book, like despite being naked the entire time. And it was like, that was the kind of back and forth that we were talking about as we built this. And it was like putting together all of the aesthetic pieces and all of the thematic pieces. And the story is kind of the last piece that came together, because I knew where that story began, but I didn't know all of the steps of the story. At first I had to lay out all of the characters and all of this stuff. And then it was but we knew what the story was about. And we knew what we were trying to like, the jugular we were going for and how to try to hit that. And so, as we were building that, it was that like, it was a fully collaborative process of discovery, and it was a discovery process more than anything. And that's really how I try to work with all of the artists that I work with. It's, I think every book would be radically different with any other artist. I like need to kind of find, what is the story about? What is it about emotionally for me? What is it about emotionally for the artist that I'm working about? What aesthetic things are we trying to accomplish? And how can we accomplish that without tripping into what I find is a dangerous thing that's very common in American comics and in genre work all around the world, which is nostalgia. Like I hate nostalgia. I love like genuine nostalgia. It's like nostalgia for childhood and stuff like that.
But you don't like how nostalgia has been exploited throughout the last years.
I don't want to
franchise making or so.
Exactly. I don't want to tell a story that's just about a story from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I want to be inspired by stories from 20 years ago. Like, and there's an important difference there. So it's like, how can you take all of your influences and let them blend together into something that feels of the moment and now, that isn't ignoring the past, but isn't beholden to it.
And there's something also with Worldtr33, which has to be one of my favorite books of yours, that internet as the thing is kind of scary. I mean, because in Memetic you were also fascinated by the memes, which are internet objects, and there's a whole undernet thing. But even if we take away the undernet thing, internet is kind of another word for us. It's and another word that we don't know at 100%.
Yeah,
there are some. I think most of it might be uncharted territories.
Yeah.
Is that something also that scares you and that you wanted to speak about with Worldtr33?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I did Memetic about 10 years ago. Yeah. And that, the thing that I would talk about when I was like, why am I writing that story? And it was especially at that point, it was it was the it was the 20 teens, would have been about 2015, I think, when that came out. 2014. And it was, so at that moment, it was the idea that like ideas can spread faster than we can understand whether or not those ideas are good or bad. And it was just like the fear of that. That was the kind of central thing. But here we are in 2025, and I think we all understand that the internet is where there's the optimistic vision of the internet that existed, I think, when we were children, where it was just like, this is all of humanity is coming into a room together and they can share all of their ideas and all of that. But then what we've seen, especially exacerbated by the tech industry and, like corporate money and all of this stuff, is how it is drawn together all of our worst impulses. The worst of ourselves have come together, and that the worst of ourselves coming together has become more powerful than the best of us coming together. And the internet has been a gathering point for that, and and an amplifier of all of those worst tendencies. And so, the Worldtr33 at its heart is about, the optimistic vision of the internet of the past up against a world in which the internet has in some ways may have paved the ground for the end of Western civilization. And it's that's something, and it's all just because it just allowed the worst of ourselves to gather together and become more powerful. And that, I wanted to speak to that directly.
And there's also the thing that you have lived through the evolution of internet, because I think we might be the same age. You're 34?
I'm 37.
37,
yeah.
Okay. Oh, there's someone told me you were younger. But it's all right.
Yeah.
So I'm 35, so we were basically the same age. So we grew up during the same, a period of time where internet began as something that was really slow. Only a few websites were available, and we have now the internet that we have today. And did it help you also to go back maybe to that time you lived, to just write the scenes that are supposed to be in the past?
Yeah,
it was not you did not research. Is maybe you just thought about how was it?
I did do there was a lot of research still for the book, because I wanted to look at the how the tech industry built up. That's what I was built. A lot of what there's an element to that is wasn't just my own lived experience, but I do think in at the heart of it is just I was an internet kid, a little younger than the kind of Worldtr33 crew, but they, because I was 12 years old in 1999 and they're 18 years old in 1999. but it is the like that that the emotional feeling of what I wanted the internet to be is what I'm trying to tap into there, because it was this beautiful escape. Like at that point, you know, my mom used the internet for email, but then the internet was a thing that was left in the other room and all of that. And then when she went to bed, I would go over on the computer and like on the family computer, and I would have access to this whole other world. That was how I discovered so much about myself. And, you know, it is confronting, like having been a part of that and then seeing what it's become. And that, you know, like, that has become something that I think we should rightfully be afraid of. And we should ask ourselves a lot of questions about, how some of that early optimism actually paved the road for where we're at now. Yeah.
And so you mentioned that you did the researches for this book, and I was wondering, did you try to go in the dark web?
I actually I poked around with the dark web a bit in the build up to the Department of Truth, but it's like very lightly. Like it was something that I read a lot about it, but it's just more, you know, once you know, I wasn't going in there to try to like figure out how it worked or to find like, you know, where can I get the assassins and all of that shit. You know, you know, but it's like I do like, you know, it's much more of the history of like extremism and the history of places like 4chan and, you know, like that kind of started up in their nascent forms in my late high school years and then, you know, became a dominant place while I was in college. And, you know, the kind of the image boards and like the, you know, like all of the kind of early gathering places for, like radical belief, especially in, you know, like especially in American geek culture. And because there is a real like reactionary element of like geek culture, and, you know, in the mid, like, you know, I think a lot of people have written about how like Gamergate like paved the road for so much of what would become the alt-right in America, which would become so much of just what the right like, you know, is today. Yeah. Like all of those and now what they call the manosphere, just in terms of like all of these series of podcasts and all of that. It's like, yeah, I'm always kind of plugged into where dangerous beliefs are kind of thriving, and the people, while always trying to be sympathetic to the people who find comfort in those stories. Like, because I think writing the Department of Truth, which is that about conspiracy theories, is the, you know, it's made me like, I am not sympathetic at all to the people who kind of weaponize belief and who try to manipulate people by leaning into their worst instincts. But I try not to demonize the people who find comfort in those beliefs until they cross a line that, because, you know, there comes a point that it's just like, once you're actually hurting people, that crosses a line. But there are people who sort of find definition in all of that. And, you know, like that is like at the heart of it, it's like the internet's this evil internet beneath the internet that a bunch of young people like find meaning in, and an almost like a meaning that is like religious in its fervor. And then they end the world. Like that is like, it's made literal in Worldtr33, but I think you can see what I'm talking about in all of that.
So you mentioned It by Stephen King just before in terms of influences, but I've got another question. Like, have you read 20th Century Boys?
Yes, 20th Century Boys
because
is
it
another
really seems to be.
Yeah. I mean, both of, like, you know, I have to imagine Urasawa also read it.
Yeah, sure.
Like, you know, you
But
know,
really,
the
because
idea of
there's
a
also-
friend group over many eras.
Yeah, and the fact that someone seems to have planned everything in advance and foreseen the future. So it really seems that this element, it's really like we could call the Worldtr like a James Tynion IV 20th century boys.
Yeah. No, I think that would be a fair accusation.
It's not an accusation. It's
No.
It's a compliment, actually.
Yeah,
you know?
no. I appreciate it. Urasawa, I think, is one of the greatest living comic creators. You know, like 20th Century Boy, Monster, and Pluto in particular are just like, I think, stunning works.
But I was wondering in terms of pacing and writing stories, because you mentioned before that at the beginning you didn't have the whole story planned out.
Yeah.
So how does it work for you right now? Because we are like at issue 14 or 15. Do you know already how long Worldtr is going to be? And is it hard to write stories in different timelines like you're doing?
It's definitely hard writing it in different timelines, especially when you're dumb enough to give yourself a cast of like 20 characters.
But you've done it also with the Nice House. So you seem
Nice
to
House,
like to have 20 characters.
I love a big cast of characters.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, Nice House, the thing that's easier there is, you know, there's a locked setting, and you know, there are limited tools at my disposal to introduce new characters. In Worldtr, I can introduce new characters constantly, and then I enjoy introducing new characters. So then that expands the scope of the story. There's a couple of like shitty little punk kids that I introduced in the future timeline, and you know, these couple of issues, and then I just really enjoyed writing them. So now we'll see what happens to them over time. So
you don't have a fixed line, ending line.
I do. The answer is yes and no. Like,
you can't do that.
Yeah, no. I mean, the real thing is that I always, even when I was writing issue 1, like I knew which direction the compass was pointing, and I'm always walking confidently in the direction of a destination. But if I have a new idea that changes the destination, I always go with the new, more exciting idea. So then the scope of the story changes and everything, you know, and that is the joy of working in serialized fiction, is that, you know, you have to respond to how, you know, how my life is going, how the world is going around me. And then suddenly, you know, you'll realize that there's a missing piece in an issue that you've had this story outlined for a long time, but then you realize that it's like, there's a scene right here that I haven't figured out the scene. And then when you sit down and write it, you figure out what that scene is. And then you realize that one scene has now changed like 10 scenes, like further out, but it's worth it because it's like made that issue work. And then it's exciting to sort of see, like, once you change one thing, how it kind of changes the entire story. But it's also, stories do like that. That's more common at the early stages. Like in the first, you know, I always kind of like, I've noticed this in myself, is that something happens usually when I'm writing the third issue of a comic, that suddenly I see like a bunch of the missing pieces, and then the rest of the story comes into sharp focus for me, and I'm able to sort of figure it out from there. With Something is Killing the Children, that's around when I realized that first story cycle was going to be 15 issues, because originally I was only greenlit for 5 issues. So it was writing issue 3 that was like, okay, I see the structure of this whole thing. It's 15 issues. And it was writing those issues that then I realized the importance of the House of Slaughter and the larger mythology around there. But it was still me just kind of throwing information out there, and it's like, oh, something like this. And then responding to what my artist threw back at me. Like there's a panel in issue 4, I think, of Something is Killing the Children, where there's a flash to the House of Slaughter. It might actually be issue 5. Where I literally described, it's like you see an old man at the end of the table, and then there's a bunch of other people at that table who have different color masks with different stuffed animals in front of them. And I didn't know what that meant at that moment. I just thought that would be a cool look.
Okay.
But then it was sort of like, okay, now that I've done that, it's like, what do all of those masks mean? What do and
then you had to build everything.
Yeah. And it's like, that's the fun, that's the fun bit of the collaboration, because it all comes from what works on the page. And it's never the things that, Worldtree is also one that I point to a lot, where the initial concept for Worldtree, the character of Ellison, I think used to be a much more traditional protagonist. But then Fernando kind of drew him a little dopey and wide-eyed. And then I was just like, it's more fun if he's not as smart as everyone else. Like, it is actually more fun if everyone around him is about 10 times smarter than him. And that he's stumbled into this whole story that's happening around him. And so it's like, I saw the art, and then the art completely changed the trajectory of the story. And that made the character of Fausta so much more important, because she's twice as smart as Ellison. And that dynamic is going to change it all. I love, it is like, that's the living part of collaboration. If I wasn't interested in that kind of back and forth and the long form discovery process, I would write novels, because then I'd be able to just write something fully insular on my own. I'd be able to change everything and tighten all the screws. But I love the fact that it's like, okay, that issue is already out and published in stores, therefore it's canon. I can't change that issue anymore. So it's like, now I have to carry that piece forward. And I always have the sense of, I always have the size and the shape of the story, but I need to be discovering. There has to be a discovery process while I'm writing every single issue. If I over outline and try to adhere really tightly to the outline, I feel stifled by it. And then on top of that, at this point, because this is how I write, anytime I nail down the outline, something radical shifts. There's an issue of Department of Truth that's coming out later this year that I just wrote the opening sequence of a few days ago. And I realized what I needed to introduce as a part of that. And then it was just like, oh, that actually changes a lot of my plans for the next 2 years on the book. And then I was just like, so I had to write a long introduction to the issue for Martin, where I'm just like, okay, this is what these pieces are and what
change
they
of
are.
rules.
But it's Department of Truth in particular. It's about American politics, and there's no way that book wasn't going to be changed by what was happening in the world around me.
Yeah, of course. Just the last question about Worldtr, then we switch to Nice House, about fear, the fear character. So you mentioned it was maybe the embodiment maybe of all the sexualized stereotype that guys basically have on the internet. But you didn't have to make her naked also, and I was really wondering why you and Fernando chose your boogeyman to be a naked woman.
I mean, I think it does speak to those kinds of, it is the relationship a lot of people have with the internet. There are a lot of people whose core relationship to the internet is a naked woman. And I think that weaponizing that and embodying that in this very dangerous way was really deliberate. But it's also in a more primal way. We wanted, because fear is a very primal character, and a very tragic one as the series goes on and we learn more about her. But it is something that, she is just so unconcerned with the rules of the world as they are, and there's nothing that she's hiding. There's no ulterior motive. There's nothing. She is just bare essence, what she is. And that element was just so clearly a part of her from go, that it's just like she's not hiding anything. She's not like there, you know, especially her brother Gabriel is like a master manipulator who has never revealed his true intentions to anyone, including the people he most loves in the world. And then like Fear says precisely what she wants and is precisely what she wants. And the power of that in her like just like naked essence is, you know, like it's startling. And that's the deliberate intent. And it's also, you know, it's also the like the both of her extremities, both her nudity and then the extremities of her violence are kind of the extremities that desensitize people online. And so it is just that kind of like, she is the embodiment of everything that this like generation of her followers are just completely desensitized to. Like sex and violence now have no meaning to the point of like, you know, and she's so naked throughout the book that it's never sexual, that it's like, other than her being a naked woman, it is like, it almost becomes boring on the page. And that's the other like important bit of it. She's not like posing. She's not anything. She just is. And there's something deeply unsettling about that.
Okay. Switching to The Nice House on the Lake and by the Sea. So the book came out in 2021, so 1 year after the pandemic, and it is a story about the end of the world. So my first question is, were you inspired by the COVID pandemic, or did you have anything to do with the comic pandemic so you could write a book about it afterwards?
It did come out. It came out at the perfect time, you know. But I actually I think
no, that's my conspiracy theory.
Yeah. No, it's a good one. I mean, I pitched that story about 3 years before it came out. I think it was 2018 is when I sent the pitch in to DC, that it was like, this is a story I want to do, which is obviously before all of that happened. Because at that moment, it was still like, you know, we were in the US, it was the middle of the first Trump presidency and all of that stuff. It was still me trying to talk about in a very like base way that it's like, what is it like to know that it's the end of the world out there? Like, and all of these horrible things are happening out there. And you're kind of trapped in this paradise where you know that what's happening outside of that paradise is everyone you know and love is like experiencing all of this pain, but you have no power to change that. So do you embrace living in paradise, or do you let the fact that it's the end of the world out there consume you? And that was the kind of core tension that I wanted to talk about in the book, because it felt very much like the core tension of living in, living in those times. But then once we actually it's a long process to get a book like up and running. So once we actually started writing it, I wrote the first issue, shortly after, lockdown. And, so it was in 2020, spring of 2020 is when I was writing the first issue. Actually, I think I wrote the first one at the beginning of 2020, and then we actually changed one thing. And it's actually the one thing that dates the book in the wrong way, because it didn't become a common thing, is the character of Nora tests Ryan's temperature with one of those electronic temperature checks at the start of it. And that was a kind of nod to, Ryan's wearing a mask, all of that stuff. Like, we were leaning into some of the trappings of the moment, even though those aren't the mask ended up staying a thing, but the temperature checks kind of fell away pretty quickly. But obviously the living in lockdown changed the emotional tenor of the book, and I understood the isolation that those characters were feeling much more so than I think if I had written it a year prior. And then I think it allowed us to kind of hit that of a more zeitgeist moment just because of when we launched, but it wasn't planned that way in any way. We were already gearing up to do it. It just took a while for our schedules to line up to start working on the book at the same time.
Okay, so I'm just going to continue to think that you were in Wuhan and you released the virus just before that. But
yeah.
So you've worked many years with Alvaro on Detective Comics, on Justice League Dark. So I don't know if you were already also speaking together about this project, or it just came naturally when you had the idea down that Alvaro would draw, especially that since that Alvaro changed a lot of his style for this book.
No, I mean, like, I had loved working with Alvaro, and that had been true for years. You know, especially during, like, we had worked together a bit on Batman Eternal, but it was our Detective Comics run that I think we really like found.
And it's in this run that he started also to paint some, especially for Clayface sequences. He started to.
That actually was Eddie Barros. That was not.
No, it was Eddie Barros. Yeah,
like,
of course.
So the real thing.
My mistake.
And during that moment, you know, Alvaro was working in traditional pencils, and he had an inker at the time, Raul Fernandez, great inker. But it was one of those things that, you know, once he stepped over into this, there were like two things that he wanted to do. He wanted to shift into digital, and he wanted to ink himself. And so both of those decisions like really changed the way that he approached a page. And you know, and then it was the partnership with Jordi Belair as our colorist that I think pushed everything to the next level, because the black and white art for Nice House is already super rendered. It's already like, it has all of the depth of character, which then means that what Jordi is doing is she's like, you know, a lot of times the colorist adds the rendering and adds a lot of the definition, but it allowed Jordi to approach it from a much more abstract dimension that then I think even elevates it further. But you know, I had always known how good an artist Alvaro was, but he really hit the next level working on this series, and I'm so grateful for that.
But how does it how does it go between you two? Do you do you have a lot of input in terms of visual elements? Like, for example, when we see in the first issue the first transformation of Worldtr, which is incredibly done. Did you have anything to say about how it should look?
We had a lot of conversations about Worldtr, because I think my initial concepts for it was much more like he was kind of glitching out of reality in ways that actually would, like, I would go back to some of that imagery in Worldtr. But you know, our editor, like Alvaro, drew a few incredible images of like a kind of glitching Worldtr, but you know, like our editor at the time had a very, very good point. Like, and this is Chris Conroy, he's still the editor of the book, but which was just the fact that that glitching thing would make it feel like he wasn't real. So how Worldtr kind of phased out of reality and showed his alien self needed to still feel like grounded in reality. And Alvaro started doing all of these tests of different ways to express it. And what we ended up on is this, you know, what we've called in the book a few times, the flesh tornado. And that, like that abstraction is just so unsettling, and so inhuman, and, you know, and then it's alien, but not alien in any traditionally alien way. That, yeah, like, but I mean, you know, the way that was expressed on the page, you know, the only thing like core to the Worldtr, like there were a few things that were built into the Worldtr design from the beginning that did come from me. Like, you know, I knew that Worldtr is a character that's very much based on me. So there are elements of my own physical appearance that are just very reflected in Worldtr. Like, but I also knew that I wanted to play with that classic, you know, manga anime technique of just his glasses would always be like you would never see the his eyes behind his glasses. And it's not like he's wearing like special glasses. Like the people inside the world are able to see his eyes normally, but it's just like as a stylistic choice. It is a like you, by never seeing the eyes, you never know what his true intentions are, and there is a distance that's between him and all of the people around him. And that was like a very deliberate piece. But the flesh tornado was like that required that kind of back and forth. And yeah, like, you know, we spent a lot of time designing all of the core pieces of Nice House. But it's like, and like we spent months designing the house, like, and doing layouts and all of that, and like sending Zillow like house listings from very wealthy like homes, like all of these very like luxuriously hyper designed houses that we were just tossing back and forth and like taking cool ideas and sort of blending them together. And then we spent a lot of time on each of the characters, both of them as high schoolers and adults and all of that stuff, so that once we're actually in issue to issue, like the settings are all set, the characters are all set. So scene by scene, I'm really just describing the core actions and the characters' emotions. Like I'm not, you know, like I'll lay out, you know, like what's happening in a given page and like the number of panels and, you know, everything that I see happening. But my panel descriptions are very simple. Like they are just, you know, like it is describing the character and what they are feeling in the moment that they're saying what they're saying. And, you know, like, and then obviously there are more visually dynamic sequences that'll like, you know, I'll throw some ideas, but then it's always a bit more of a back and forth.
It really seemed like Nice House on the Lake was speaking also about how the wrong we can do, but with the good intentions. And the Nice House by the Sea seems to be for Donna quite the opposite. Like how the wrong we can do, given the worst of ourselves.
Yeah.
Are you just trying to paint a map of the human behavior condition?
Yeah. I think I absolutely am. I think it is, you know, I do think that ultimately Nice House is a kind of statement on what like friendship and community is, and our responsibilities to each other as a part of that community, and, you know, and a kind of statement on like what it is to be exceptional, because obviously that's so built into the core concept of the book, where, you know, we have these aliens who have basically each selected, you know, 10 perfect humans, and Walter is the strange alien that just picked his 10 favorites, like, and he's saying that his 10 favorites, who are just his close friends, are the best humans that exist. And then you see what happens when someone has chosen 10 people that you could make an actual argument are 10 of the most exceptional humans that exist. But there's no community there because none of those people like each other. And it is that kind of, you know, like ultimately, like, are we, you know, it's confronting that there are things that Walter was correct about in choosing this sample set in humanity, but there's still the way he chose them, and, you know, the way he took that choice away from them and participating in this still makes him like a very like complicated, you know, villain in the series. But, you know, hopefully a sympathetic villain.
And was it planned from the beginning that you will do a three arc story?
It is. It's funny. There's one interview I did with Comic Book Resources before the first issue came out, where I said, it's like, if this goes well, I see this as the three story cycles. And it's just like, that has been true from before I started the first issue. And, you know, like, it was about halfway through writing the first Nice House. I always had the rough shape of what Nice House by the Sea was. And I knew there's the new figure in the story, Max. And that was like, and Max's relationship with Nora, like that dynamic was all like mapped while I was writing, you know, Nice House on the Lake 4. But the Oliver of it all came into more clear focus as I started in On the Ark, and the way that his character kind of shapes the whole thing. And then it was similarly at kind of the halfway point of like, or actually it was a little before the halfway point. It was around issue 4 again that I sat down with Alvaro and I laid out like, this is my idea for the full 3rd story cycle. And now that will bring us to the conclusion of the story.
And I was just wondering, in terms of editorial, if the fact that the series changed from the just DC label to the DC Vertigo had any did it change anything to you? Is it a creator owned? Is it something that you own, you and Alvaro, even though it's published by DC?
There's yeah, I mean, we own it more than we would if we had done a superhero comic at DC. It's definitely, you know, it's part, like, you know, DC has a core piece of it. There's a way that it could end up just being like Justin back in Alvaro in my hands, but it's a successful series. So I think DC is inclined to keep it in print, you know, and so it is a partnership with DC, but, you know, the copyright's in me and Alvaro's name, not DC's. DC couldn't take it and go do like a superhero crossover with it. But it is a, you know, the Vertigo of it all is funny because, you know, my first job in comics was I was an editorial intern at Vertigo. Vertigo is why I make comics. In my head, when I first pitched this to DC, I pitched it to Vertigo before Vertigo closed as an imprint at DC. So in my head, this has always been a Vertigo book. And so now it has the correct logo on the cover.
Okay. And last question, where is going to be the last house? By the mountain?
You're going to have to see. You're going to have to see.
By the city?
Yeah. No, I gotta, like right now, and we'll see what it lands on. But it's like I have there's a twist in the last name. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, James Tynion, and I hope we'll discuss another time with all the other books that we haven't the time to speak about today.
Thank you.